Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us for Alaska weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. You can see the phone number, website, and email address on the screen. You can get a forecast for your area anytime at that phone number. At the website, weather.gov/Alaska, you can put in your city and state or zip code and get a personalized local forecast 24 hours a day if you have internet access. And as always, if you have any comments or feedback for us, feel free to email us at that email address, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. Looking a little bit at what happened yesterday with an update on that rainfall that we talked about in yesterday's show, we did end up setting new rainfall records for both Anchorage and Talkeetna. Those are daily rainfall records for July 8th. Anchorage ended up with 0.67 inches of rain at the airport. That broke the previous record of 0.55 inches for July 8th. That occurred in 1967. For Talkeetna, the airport ended up receiving 1.35 inches of rain yesterday. That broke the previous record of 1.2 inches, which occurred on July 8th, 1936. Along with all that rain, as you might expect, we saw some rises on some of the local rivers. This is showing the Little Susitna River below Hatcher Pass Bridge. Hatcher Pass ended up receiving a little bit more than an inch of rain yesterday as well. So you can see that bump in the river level. So people in the South Central and Matsu Valley areas may have noticed some rises on rivers, but as that rain has tapered off today, we've seen those rivers come back down to the levels that they were before the rain occurred yesterday. We don't have any actual hazards in effect for today, but we are looking at some fire danger areas across the state. That high fire danger has expanded since yesterday for the northern half of the state in general. So we're looking at the Yukon Flats and then northward to the north side of the Brooks Range. That area of high fire danger expanded west today to the western portion of the Brooks Range and even a little bit to the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Also expanding south along the Canadian border and into the Copper River Valley. We also have a couple of areas of extreme fire danger today across the Yukon Flats and on the south side of the Brooks Range. So we'll be keeping a close eye on fire danger over the coming days. We hope to get some rain in these areas, which should help to tamp that fire danger threat back down a bit. Looking at our satellite imagery over the last number of hours, we can see one noticeable system in the northern Gulf, which is going to be bringing some rain into the Panhandle. We see just some clouds across the Brooks Range, but not a whole lot of rain to speak of there. Dry weather for the west coast today with high pressure in command, and then our last system bringing clouds and rain up into the Aleutians for today. So speaking of today's weather, we have thunderstorms expected to develop this afternoon and this evening across much of the interior from the Alaska Range northward to the south side of the Brooks Range, that typical area that we've been seeing thunderstorms the last number of days. Today is somewhat unique though, because we could see some strong thunderstorms in those areas, including frequent lightning, hail. In fact, the strongest storms could produce some large hail. We could see some brief heavy rain, and as always, heavy rain can produce minor flooding on small streams and in urban areas. Fairbanks being probably the biggest urban area that could be impacted by that today. So if you are in the interior, make sure to keep an eye and an ear out for storms, and remember, when thunder roars, go indoors. If you are close enough to be able to hear the thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. So it's a good time to head inside until the storm passes. We're also looking at that low pressure that we saw in the satellite that's going to be moving towards the Panhandle today. So bringing rain to the Panhandle, showers for South Central, as well as pretty much the entirety of the North Gulf Coast. Also some showers for the Alaska Peninsula and showers for the western Aleutians, with that next front just starting to move into the islands. For tonight, we have those thunderstorms tapering off, but we will see some showers lingering through the southeastern portion of the interior with weak low pressure developing there. That low pressure in the northern Gulf starting to bring a trough into the panhandle, so we'll see continued rain there. Dry conditions across the west coast as well as the north slope tonight, but with those dry conditions, we do expect some fog to form and high pressure in the Bering Sea with some showers there and showers continuing for the Aleutians tonight. Friday, we expect more thunderstorms in the interior for the afternoon, although those thunderstorms will be a little bit more relegated south of the Yukon River in general for tomorrow afternoon. Showers continuing for the North Gulf Coast with low pressure both near the Canadian border and another weak low pressure system in the northern Gulf. That system moving into the Panhandle will continue to bring rain there, and a breaking up occluded front will continue rain in the Aleutians. High pressure over the Bering Sea will keep the west coast dry, but we still have that fog in for Friday. We're not sure that fog is going to completely lift during the day for Friday along the west coast or the north slope. So if you're in those areas, expect foggy conditions through the day on Friday. Saturday, we're seeing that chance of thunderstorms spread further west from the northern Alaska Peninsula to the YK Delta to the western interior. We'll also see continuing thunderstorm chances for the southeast inland area around the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains. But then south of there near the Gulf Coast, showers and rain continuing for the Panhandle. Still high pressure over the Bering Sea on Saturday, so still dry along the immediate west coast as well as the north slope. But again, we'll probably still see some fog in those areas on Saturday, as we could see about 48 hours total of fog in those areas with high pressure in command and light winds and not really any rain to speak of. We still have that occluded front that's going to be hanging around near the Aleutians, bringing some rain into that area as well. Low temperatures on Friday morning, we are looking at pretty consistent upper 40s to low 50s from the Panhandle to South Central and out to the Alaska Peninsula. A little bit cooler on the west coast with that high pressure in control. So low to mid 40s for the YK Delta and the Seward Peninsula up to the Chukchi Sea coast. And then, as always, our coldest temperatures in general expected north of the Brooks Range for the North Slope, dropping down to around freezing or even just below freezing with that 31 degrees there at Utqiagvik. For the interior, around 50 to lower 50s. And then for the Aleutians, we are looking at mid 40s there. 52 at Kodiak, 50 at Homer, 52 at Seward. So looking at low 50s for the Gulf Coast area. For high temperatures on Friday, getting up to around 70 degrees for much of the western interior. Our warm spot looks like it may be around the Dillingham area over to King Salmon, both looking around 72 degrees on Friday afternoon. Rather cool along the immediate west coast with highs just in the 50s and highs around 40 degrees to maybe the low 40s for the North Slope on Friday afternoon. The interior looks warm, but not quite as warm, so temperatures in the 60s, low 60s for the Yukon Flats, and then some upper 60s as well. South Central looking like mid 60s down into the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, and then around 50 to low 50s for the Aleutians, and around 60 degrees for the Panhandle on Friday afternoon. Saturday morning, pretty similar to what we saw Friday morning. Temperatures along the North Slope right around freezing, a degree above or below freezing. Temperatures in the mid 40s to low 50s for much of the interior, as well as South Central and the Panhandle, stretching down into the Aleutians. And high temperatures on Saturday afternoon. Again, we'll see our warmest temperatures in the western interior, but not quite as warm as we saw on Friday. So peaking in the upper 60s instead of the lower 70s. A bit warmer on parts of the west coast, with Seward Peninsula, Nome getting up to about 61 degrees, but not as warm on the north side of the Seward Peninsula, with temperatures only reaching into the 40s on Saturday afternoon. A little bit warmer in south central for Saturday afternoon, with temperatures in the lower 60s to some upper 60s, around 67 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Onto your aviation weather. Taking a look at flying weather on Friday morning, we expect IFR conditions through much of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, stretching northward up the immediate west coast of the state, as well as for the north slope. Also some IFR conditions in the northern Gulf and extending into much of the Panhandle for Friday morning. Friday afternoon, we'll see some improvement along the coastal areas of the North Slope as well as the West Coast, with IFR generally being relegated to the offshore areas. IFR still over much of the Bering Sea, though, as well as much of the Aleutians, and still in the northern Gulf and stretching to the southern Panhandle for Friday afternoon. Saturday morning, we see those IFR conditions spread back into some of the coastal areas along the immediate North Slope as well as West Coast, and as well as the northern side of the Alaska Peninsula, stretching down through the Aleutians and into the Bering Sea. Also, IFR expanding into the eastern Kenai Peninsula and up into Prince William Sound. And VFR conditions expected for the Panhandle on Saturday morning, with IFR conditions stretching from about the Mat-Su Valley north to the Alaska Range. For Saturday afternoon, we'll again see some improvement along the coastal areas of the North Slope and the West Coast, with IFR generally pushing offshore, although continuing over the entire Bering Sea and into the Aleutians. Also IFR for the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula, stretching east across Prince William Sound to the Canadian border and even into some of the northern parts of the Panhandle. The rest of the Panhandle expected to be VFR, though, with VFR over much of the mainland for Saturday afternoon. Pass conditions on Friday, MVFR in the morning at Anaktuvuk Pass, improving to VFR in the afternoon. Same story at Adigan Pass, MVFR improving to VFR. Lake Clark Pass, VFR for Friday, but we will see some MVFR conditions along the east entrance of Lake Clark Pass in the morning hours. And then afternoon thunderstorms expected at both Lake Clark and Merrill Passes. Merrill Pass expected to be MVFR in the morning and improving to VFR in the afternoon. Rainy Pass, MVFR in the morning, improving to VFR in the afternoon. There'll actually be a chance of thunderstorms throughout the day at Rainy Pass, so not just an afternoon thunderstorm threat there. Windy Pass, MVFR with VFR in the afternoon. Afternoon thunderstorms at Windy Pass, as well as afternoon thunderstorms at Isabel Pass with MVFR in the morning, improving to VFR in the afternoon. Same thing at Mentasta Pass, MVFR expected in the morning with VFR in the afternoon, and as well as some afternoon thunderstorms. Tanita Pass, MVFR throughout the day with afternoon thunderstorms, as well as Portage Pass, MVFR pretty much all day with afternoon thunderstorms expected. Chilkoot and White Passes both expected to be VFR on Friday with no thunderstorms in the area. Freezing levels for Friday morning, we've got two areas of warmer air moving in. So one is going to be over the Aleutians. We see a 14,000 foot line just south of the Aleutians. So warmer air coming up into the Aleutians, into the Bering Sea. The other is from the southeast. We see 8 and 10,000 foot freezing levels coming up towards the Panhandle. Also 8,000 foot freezing level over much of the state, with a cold pocket over the northeastern border with Canada at 4,000 feet to 6,000 feet in that area. Icing on Friday, above 10,000 feet, isolated moderate icing over pretty much the entire Panhandle, and an area between the Central Brooks Range to the North Slope, isolated moderate icing above 8,000 feet for Friday. Jet stream winds, we've got low pressure in the Gulf. That main jet is going to be going south of that low pressure system, so we see 60 to 95 knots out of the northwest coming south from the Alaska Peninsula, and then on the other side of the low coming up into the Panhandle, 60 to 90 knots out of the south and southwest. 9,000 foot winds on Friday. We've got that same low pressure system in the Gulf, high pressure in the Bering, and another low over northwestern Canada. So 35 to 50 knots around counterclockwise around that low pressure in the Gulf. And then the other main winds that we have are with a low approaching the western Aleutians, 30 knots out of the east north of that low over the Aleutians. For 3,000 foot winds, low pressure in the Gulf with 25 to 40 knots out of the southeast over the Panhandle and about 45 knots out of the east for the Aleutians. Turbulence below 4,000 feet over the western Aleutians and below 8,000 feet for the Panhandle.
Hey there, Lunar Loonies, I'm Trace, and this week will be a beautiful summertime full moon, but I wanted to answer a question that a lot of people have about the face of the moon. Why do we never see the back? You'd think that would mean the moon doesn't rotate, but if you take a top-down view, the moon is actually rotating at the same rate as the Earth. We refer to the moon as tidally locked, meaning the orbital period of the moon is synchronized with the rotational period of Earth. The moon does have a far side, though. It was first imaged by the Soviet probe Luna 3. Just don't call it the dark side, because when we see a new moon, the backside of the moon is actually facing the sun. The far side is pockmarked with even more craters than the near side, because the near side had more volcanic activity to fill up the craters. So keep looking up.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
You have a lot of pilots. In fact, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft.
No.
Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets and they're cold and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid. And that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer there was a lot of those super cooled liquid drops or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. You know, it's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, you know, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right, Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, of course, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
It's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we've had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for a look at your marine forecast. Starting out with the sea ice edge, we're seeing the same trends today that we saw yesterday with the thinning of the ice between Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay. We still expect the ice right along the coast in that area to become marginal through the next 5 days or so. So by the end of the weekend, expect continued thinning of the ice between Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay. Marine forecast over southeast. We're seeing winds out of the southeast and east over the Gulf for Friday at 15 to 25 knots, 10 to 20 knots of wind across the inside waterways out of the south, 5 to 6 foot seas in the Gulf, 2 feet for the northern inside waterways, but 7 foot seas down by the southern inside waterways near Ketchikan and Metlakatla. For Saturday, we'll see those winds and seas come down a bit, still out of the east and southeast in general, but just 5 to 10 knots of wind over the Gulf with 4 to 6 foot seas. Seas also coming down over the inside waterways where we had that 7 foot seas over the southern inside waterways down to 3 feet on Saturday, and 10 to 15 knots of wind over the inside waterways out of the south for Saturday. Friday for South Central, we're seeing winds 10 to about 20 knots, generally out of the east, although we do see some southerly flow in Cook Inlet. Seas low 3 feet to about 6 feet for the Gulf, about 2 feet over Prince William Sound and Cook Inlet on Friday. For Saturday, those winds, not a whole lot of change in the speeds, 5 to about 15 knots, so coming down just a little bit. Directions change a little bit though, generally out of the south and southeast for those winds on Saturday. Seas 3 to 4 feet over the Gulf, about 3 feet over Cook Inlet, and still 2 feet for Prince William Sound on Saturday. Friday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, we'll see winds out of the west and northwest 15 to 20 knots across the area. Seas 4 to 6 feet for the Gulf side and just about 3 feet for the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula and in Bristol Bay. Looking ahead into Saturday, still winds 10 to 15 knots, although shifting a little bit more to the west and southwest. Seas still in that 3 to 5 foot range on the Gulf side and a little bit lower on the Bering Sea side, about 2 to 3 feet in Bristol Bay. For Friday in the Aleutian chain, Winds pretty consistently out of the east with a little bit of northeasterly flow, 15 to 30 knots with those strongest winds in the central Aleutians around Atka and Adak. Seas 5 to 9 feet on the south side of the Aleutians and 3 to 9 feet on the north side of the Aleutians, with those highest seas coinciding with those strongest winds around Atka and Adak. For Saturday, we'll see winds 20 to 25 knots, pretty much in the same direction out of the northeast and east, a little bit more consistent with those winds on Saturday. So we'll see seas also come up a little bit for the western Aleutians with those couple of days of consistent winds to about 10 feet for the western Aleutians, 8 to 9 feet on the Gulf side, and about 5 to 8 feet on the Bering side of the eastern Aleutians. For the west coast on Friday, winds out of the west and northwest about 15 knots, although as we get down into the Bering, winds shift a little bit out of the south as we have high pressure in command down there, about 10 knots, just 2 to 3 foot seas across the board for Friday. Saturday, winds out of the north and northwest, 10 to 15 knots, still relatively small seas, just 2 to 3 feet. For the Arctic coast on Friday, North Slope, northerly winds 5 to 10 knots, Chukchi Sea coast 15 to 20 knots out of the northeast, and about 15 knots out of the north headed into the Bering Strait. For Saturday, we'll have still northerly winds along the North Slope 5 to 10 knots, 15 to 20 knots along the northwest coast, although a little bit more consistent northeasterly and northerly winds for Saturday. Tonight, we're seeing showers over the southeast interior, rain over the panhandle, and high pressure into the Bering Sea with fog along the west coast. Thanks so much for watching Alaska TV Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.